test test.
Got echo.
Hello, hello, testing, testing. Got echo na? No echo, right? If can, I want to stay here. I don't go anywhere.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the next session of API Dance Forum 2022. This session is entitled Thin Registry and Data Escrow for ccTLD and gTLD. For your information, in this session, we will be discussing how a thin registry, the contact details for the domain registration, usually the registrant, admin, technical, and billing contact are stored at the registrar's whois and whois. In a thick registry system, all the contact details are stored on the registry level whereby there is no registrar whois. Before we begin, I would like to highlight that you can win prizes by attending the forum session. Here is how it goes. All you have to do is to attend all the forum session, engage with the speaker throughout the Q&A, and visit the virtual booth to collect the point. The top 10 participants who collect the most points will receive an Amazon gift card worth USD 50 each. Our moderator for this session will be Stephanie Chow from MyNIC. Let us welcome her. Stephanie, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Amir. I'm Stephanie Chow, the moderator of this session. In this session, we have our special guest, Mr. Gavin Brown, to talk about rethinking the Thin Registry model. Gavin Brown is Head of Registry Services and Chief Innovation Officer at Centranet Group plc. Gavin joined the company in 2001, became Chief Technology Officer in 2005, and became the Chief Innovation Officer in 2019, and shortly became the Head of Registry Services in March 2020. He is the author of several RFC relating to the domain name system and has participated in a number of public policy groups, including ICANN Technical Study Groups, TSGS. Without further ado, I think Gavin, everyone has been waiting for this topic. I will pass the floor to you. The floor is yours,
Thank you very
Gavin.
much. Thank you, Stephanie, and hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I hope that this is the last session that you're going to be sitting through today. So I hope that it strikes the right note. The title of my presentation is Rethinking the Thin Registry Model, and what I have aimed to do during this presentation is outline some of the ways I think the current system is broken and how I think it could be improved. I want to tell you a story, starting with the very early days of ICANN and the rollout of the shared registry system model for the legacy gTLDs, .com.net and .org, and the journey that we've all been on as a community over the last 20 years to develop that model and in various ways. So hopefully you should all be able to see my screen now. Firstly, as I mentioned before, this is a journey that we're going on, and I just want to give a quick trigger warning. There will be some sarcasm. It is the end of the day, so I think it's justifiable. And I will be discussing things that are sore points for many people over many years. So this is your warning. If you're a little triggered by these things, you might want to go and find something else to do. I want to set the scene just by describing the current registration data journey. I apologize. Registration data journey for domain names under the gTLDs at the moment. So there's a complex system of governance and the data flows between registrants and registrars, resellers, if there are any, going to the registries, going to data escrow agents, and then selected elements of that data is published through the registration data directory services, which is obviously whois and RDAP. ICANN kind of coordinates and governs the system through contracts with each of the different parties. So with the registrars, with the registries, and with the data escrow agents, and also with the emergency backend registry operator, the EBRO, which you see at the top right of this diagram, which is primarily why the data escrow system exists in the first place, is to ensure that there's business continuity. So essentially, the way to visualize this system and the registrar model is that the registry is a database, and the registrars are really clients of that database. In the UK, we have a system for registering weddings, and the registry of weddings is a big book that your wedding is or marriage is registered into, and the person who holds the pen when they write your name into the book is the registrar, and that's the right way to think about registries and registrars. So the registry is a database that holds the list of all the domain names in a particular top-level domain. Registrars have the ability to insert entries into that database. Each domain name has a set of registration data elements associated with it. The way that the system currently works is that registration data records can be held by either or registry and registrar. So they can be held at both sides, or they can be held at one side. And then, as I said before, access to this data is provided through the directory services. What are the differences between thick and thin? As already mentioned briefly. The main difference is that in the thin model, the contact information for a domain name is held only by the registrar. In a thick model, it's held by both registry and registrar, and is published in the directory services by both registry and registrar. Or in theory, it's published by both. In reality, many registrars do not publish the records for domains under thick registries. Also in theory, there is synchronization taking place between the two databases. So the registrar will be monitoring changes to domains in its own system, under its own management, being notified by registries of changes to those domain names through perhaps the change poll extension or something similar, so that at all times the principle is that both registry and registrar holds a full set of contact information for every domain name. But thin is different. In the thin model, that contact information is only held by the registrar, and all the registry can publish is what's called the thin data, which is essentially just the metadata about the domain name, the creation date, the expiry date, the name servers, DNSSEC information, and various other kind of technical parameters. So how did we get to the situation where we are now? There was a time when there was one registry and one registrar, and that was in the era of the network solutions era. COM, NET, and org were the three generic TLDs that existed, and there was only one place you could go to register them. There was network solutions, and obviously naturally that meant that network solutions was a thick registry. When ICANN came along in the 2000, or 99, 2000, it started the process of introducing what's called the shared registry system. The idea that you'd have one registry and multiple registrars, and the registry was a neutral sort of body that simply just held the contents of the registry on behalf of the registrars. And it essentially came to the point where the newly accredited registrars didn't feel that network solutions at the time, obviously not related to the network solutions now, please don't sue me, didn't really feel that they could trust their customers' data with network solutions as it was then. And so the solution was that .com and .net, which were the two TLDs that network solutions, later VeriSign, assumed the operation of under the shared registry model, were thin registries, and the thin registry model was created to support that. Whilst most ccTLDs, and obviously .org as well, were thick registries. In order to provide business continuity, there was a program of data escrow that registrars had to do. They had to deposit a weekly CSV file containing all of their customer information to a third-party escrow agent, but there wasn't a great deal of enforcement or compliance of that requirement. And then in 2007, there was the register flag debacle. Those of you who've been around as long as I have will probably remember this quite well. It kept us awake quite a lot after a few nights of restless sleep dealing with this issue. It was a registrar that was growing very fast. It was kind of competing, in terms of its growth rate with GoDaddy at that time. Had millions of domains under management and spectacularly dismantled itself through a dispute between the two owners of the business. ICANN desperately tried to intervene to try and protect the interests of the registrants whose domain names were being sort of taken out of their control. But it became very clear that the data escrow system that had been set up earlier in the decade was not fit for purpose, that there were too many registrars who were not depositing the data, or the data they were depositing was insufficient or inaccurate or incomplete. And the result of that, ICANN obviously began properly auditing and enforcing the data escrow requirement, but the community itself began looking at transitioning the thin TLDs to being thick TLDs. This is something I actually supported, and I wrote in 2007, not long after the register fly incident. I wrote a post on Circle ID saying that it should be the case that all TLDs should be moved to the thick model. I was writing this perspective from writing this article from the point of view of security and business continuity concerns, making sure that customers can continue to manage their domain names if their registrar went out of business, and it seemed a reasonable thing to be doing and a reasonable objective to try and achieve. And the ICANN community seemed to agree, and so introduced in a new consensus policy to require all thin registries, so it's .com, .net, and .jobs, to migrate to being thick registry. And it became a requirement for all the new gTLDs that were in the process of being applied for and delegated, that they also all be thick TLDs. And that resulted in the transition policy, thick transition policy for ComNet and jobs back in 2017. And as you'll see here, this is the policy that was established, requiring excuse me, requiring the transition of ComNet and jobs to thick by some point in 2018. Though those of you who have an eye for dates might recognize that year, 2018, as being quite important in this whole story. And I'll give you no prizes for guessing what happens next. That's right. It was the GDPR. GDPR came along with regulation applied to data subjects in the European Union, and it turned the whole debate around data registration, data collection and publication on its head. And we're still dealing with the fallout from this process. And lots of people have done very well out of the whole process as well. So, you know, there are GDPR consultants who are watching this webinar from their private islands, sipping champagne and chuckling to themselves about how well they're doing. Thank you to the European Union. So what happened? Well, people started reading the GDPR and realized that it really wasn't written with the domain industry in mind. It didn't really consider the need to publish contact information about domain names in a directory, because as you'll see, the basic principles upon which the GDPR is designed, and obviously the GDPR has itself inspired data protection rules and laws around the world. So there are similar laws and regulations built on similar data protection principles in a variety of different jurisdictions around the world. But the two principles that really kind of pose a challenge to the registration data collection practice that are applicable in gTLDs and also in many ccTLDs are the second and third of those two principles, which I'm highlighting here. I won't read them to you, but they are there. And so essentially, they require that the data collection and processing should only be required only be done when necessary. And there should be a principle that if it's not needed, then it's not collected. And as a result, what happened was, as part of the scramble to bring the gTLD registration data policy into compliance with the GDPR and other regulation, that the thin to thick transition was essentially indefinitely postponed. It still established as a consistent policy, but it's on hold. And as you can see, the bullet points, the 3 bullet points that are necessary for that policy to be reactivated, as it were, are still some way from being finalized. So let's think about the GDPR and how it interacts with the thick registry model. This is the model that applies to every gTLD apart from .com and .net, and also many ccTLDs, those that operate along similar lines to gTLDs. or for commercial reasons or for policy reasons or whatever. As we know, Common Net from a technical point of view work just fine as thin registries. We don't need, there's no kind of pressing technical reason why we need to transition Common Net to be thick registries. They work just fine as thin registries. And if we then apply that observation to the data protection principles of the GDPR, then it strikes the disinterested observer that there may not be any legal basis under the GDPR to force any registry, any gTLD registry, to be a thick registry. And many ccTLDs, where there is no similar law, where there's no law that requires them to be a thick registry, again, the same thing. If they're processing data of data subjects who are subject to the GDPR or subject to similar legislation, they should be reviewing whether there is any legal basis for them to collect that thick registry. So my view is that this may be something that the community and the industry needs to look at and reconsider whether the thick registry model is really viable under the current regime. Obviously, there are some cases where thick registry data is needed. For example, whether it's a gTLD or a TLD that needs to validate the eligibility of the registrar. But I, over the last several years, have been thinking kind of out loud about some of the ways that we could solve that from a technical point of view. And there are two presentations that I've given to the Registration Operations Workshop, which I strongly encourage everyone listening to this to take a look at and to attend if you can. There's one coming up later this year. To try and kind of trigger and encourage a debate about technical solutions to this requirement that are compliant with the GDPR and the principles of necessary data processing and data minimization. So the first of those was something I called Who Am I? And this was really kind of a very extreme end of the spectrum in terms of how you might deal with the need to provide contact information for domain names. So this is the sort of libertarian model. This is self-publication. So rather than centralized collection of registration data, you just allow the domain operator, the domain owner, to publish that data themselves. And then you can monitor that data and process it as needed without having to maintain a big database of that data. You can just pull it from there, from them, as and when needed. And the model was, as you see, no centralized database. Domain owners would, or their operators would publish that information as a vCard file, just the same as you use in your address book. And the Who Am I protocol really just, all it did was provide a way to locate that information. And I contended when I presented this a few years ago that I didn't see this any way this was somehow any way worse than the current system or situation. So this is a link to the presentation. I won't go into it in too much detail, but you can see here that I presented this at the Registration Operations Workshop in Vancouver. There's a link here to the ROW website. I strongly encourage, as I said before, everyone to go to that website and have a look at the information that's presented there. It's very gTLD centric. It's very registrar centric, and we're very much like. I think it would definitely benefit from more participation from the wider world, especially from the Asia Pacific region, because I don't think it's particularly well represented there now. So here's an example of a Who Am I record. This is as you can see, a URI record that's placed at a label or an underscore prefix label below the domain name. So as you might recognize, the two prefixed labels that are appended to the domain name, nickname is the kind of canonical name for whois. So the ports registry, the IANA ports registry, the name for whois or port 43 is nickname, it's not whois in the IANA registry. And obviously, a nickname runs over the TCP transport. So if you were looking to resolve the URL of a Who Am I record for a domain name, then you could do a DNS query of this form, and if there was a record published, you'd get your record back that pointed to the place where you could go and retrieve that contact information. And I thought, well, let's just stick it in the DNS. Why not? Because obviously you can encode actual resources into a URL if you prefix it with the data scheme. So here's an example of a whois record that's directly embedded into the DNS, encoded in base64, and then turned into a data URI. And as a fallback mechanism, the whois protocol also allows for a well-known URL. So it would register one of what's called a well-known URL paths, add an IANA registry, which would be available for use if there was no record in the DNS. Excuse me. The next potential option is sort of a middle ground between the kind of extreme option of whois and the current model of centralized data collection, which is centralized validation, but not storage of contact information. So this was inspired by, I was standing in the queue at an airport immigration line, and I was thinking about what happens when you go through an airport and you get to the immigration desk. Back in the days before there was technology and electronic passports and things, what would happen was that the immigration officer would ask to see your passport. He'd have a quick look at it and give you a once up and down to make sure that you look like the person whose photograph was in the passport. And if it looked like you were the person in the passport, he would stamp it and give it back to you. So that's the model that the inline contacts concept tries to use. So when the domain name is created, the information about who the registrant is provided to the registry. Rather than creating a first-class contact object, it's simply presented as part of the create command. And that allows the opportunity for the registry to review that contact information, decide if that's really the right person to allocate that domain name to. And obviously, if it decides it's not, then it can reject the create command. If it decides it is, then it can approve the create command. But it doesn't need to store a copy of that contact information. It can say, okay, that's fine, off you go. And then the domain name is created, the registrar goes off and then fulfills the order from the customer to register that domain name to. This was then expanded to allow for recertification. So let's say you have a policy where you want to validate the contact information of the registrar when the domain name is renewed or when it's transferred. So the extension would allow the registry to require the presentation of contact information for various other EPP transform commands, for example, renew or transfer. And again, the registry could review that contact information, decide whether or not to permit the command from being completed, and then once it's done so, discard the contact information without the need to actually do any further storage or processing of it. And finally, it also allows for an audit mechanism. Since the EPP system has a messaging system, a message queue, the registry could implement an audit system where it could select domain names according to whatever rules it decided that it wanted to audit the contact information for, send the registrars a poll message telling them that that domain name is subject to an audit, and then the registrar could submit an empty update command that doesn't make any actual changes to the domain name with the contact information presented in the extension that allows the registry to review it. And obviously, if the registrar doesn't submit that command within a certain time frame, the domain can be suspended. This is another thing that I presented to the Registration Operations Workshop in Bangkok in 2019. So again, you can go to the ROW website and see the full presentation. And I think there's actually a video, so you can see the Q&A as well that happened afterwards. So for me, the issue here is that the thick registry model, it's an element in the room, an elephant in the room that we can't really ignore for too much longer. GDPR poses a challenge to the way that their industry has done business for the last 20-odd years. there are a number of costs and disadvantages to the thick model. And if it's illegal on top, then you really need to decide whether you actually want to do it. The two technical proposals that I've just walked you through, they are there to really prompt, as I said before, to sort of me thinking aloud, trying to prompt discussion to what's called the Overton window, the window of acceptable solutions to a problem. There may be other approaches that are possible, and I've been over the last several years trying to encourage the community to kind of discuss them and think about them with an open mind and think about how we can maybe address this issue. So that's pretty much the end of the presentation. So I'm more than happy now to take any questions that there might be.
Thank you, Gavin, for walking us through the amicus rethink, the Thin Registry model that we always have been talking about, and also share with us your two proposals, the who am I and the inline context proposal. Now, there are some questions in the Q&A. So before I proceed to talk about the questions, just a general reminder for all audience, we encourage you, if you have any question, don't be shy. Put your question in the Q&A pod. Or for those who are joining us on YouTube, remember to type your question and our staff members will push the question to us. All right, so Gavin, we have a question for you from Nora. For thick model, should the data escrow be done by the registry? And her second question is there an alternative to the data escrow?
Okay, so I think you have to analyze what the purpose of data escrow is, and the purpose of data escrow is to provide business continuity. And when you're thinking about business continuity, there are sort of two key metrics that you're building your business continuity processes towards, and they're the recovery time objective, or RTO, and the recovery point objective, or RPO. And the RTO is about how long you're willing to withstand being your business being disrupted before you need to be able to restore it. But the RPO is about how much data loss you're willing to accept. There is, in the thick model, the need for both registry and registrar to maintain a copy of registration data. And the principle is that both sides are in synchronization, so they both present the same data. But that will not always be the case. There will always be a delay, because obviously this is the internet, nothing happens instantly, things are unreliable. So the assessment then needs to be made about your risk appetite for data loss. And if you're concerned about significant desynchronization between registry and registrar, then it may be that that it's appropriate to require registrar to do data escrow as well as the registry. For a ccTLD, there's the added complication of who the sort of beneficiary of the data escrow deposit is, the data escrow system is. In the gTLD world, it's very straightforward. ICANN is the beneficiary of the data escrow system, because the idea is that ICANN, to a certain extent, can't really trust the registry operators of gTLDs to still be around tomorrow, because they can go out of business, they could be subject to a natural disaster or a revolution or a war, or God forbid anything else like that that would disrupt their operations. And ICANN has a responsibility to the global public to ensure that those domain names in that TLD can be reinstated within a reasonable time frame. So ICANN implemented the data escrow system for both registry and registrar to allow the business continuity for those TLDs. For a ccTLD, it's a slightly different model, because depending on the country code and the governance regime it operates under, it'd be harder or easier to identify who the beneficiary of that data escrow deposit would be. If a ccTLD operator is almost sort of independent from government or from any other sort of third-party stakeholder, then data escrow essentially is nothing more than an offsite backup, and a not particularly effective one as well, because data escrow deposit file only contains the bare minimum information required to restore a database. registry database. So that assessment needs to be made for a ccTLD when doing its own data escrow. Obviously, if there's a scenario where there is a third-party stakeholder, for example, a government department or a non-profit organization that's the policy organization, then it may actually indeed be appropriate to have a data escrow system in place, because that allows, in the event that your organization is unable to continue to operate, it allows that third-party stakeholder to restore the operation of the ccTLD with a successing provider of that service. But for ccTLDs, if you're operating a thin or thick registry model, it's worth again thinking about the impact of failure of a registrar. As a thick registry, you do have some contact information, but actually the amount of useful contact information can be very small, because you are, in many cases there will be proxies, there'll be private whois, and one thing you're not getting is the actual end customer information, which is not always the same information that's published in whois. The registrar data system that ICANN uses for ICANN accredited registrars does require the inclusion of underlying customer data into deposit files, and that allows for a scenario where, let's say, a registrar goes out of business, the same way that Registerfly did back in 2007. That allows you to take that data escrow deposit file and give it to another registrar and say, go and talk to all of the customers of this registrar that's gone out of business, onboard them onto your platform. Here's their phone number, here's their email address, here's all the domain names they manage, here's all the information you need to put in your database to continue service to them. So those are the kind of the different aspects of this that need to be considered by whether you're a ccTLD or a gTLD or irrespective of what governance you come under. But it's worth recognizing that ultimately a data escrow system, the word escrow implies that there's some third-party beneficiary. And so you need to understand what your relationships are with your stakeholders and identify who the appropriate beneficiary would be for that data.
Excellent, and I hope the answers by Gavin answer the audience question. And your answer, Gavin, made me think another question that I have is that based on your observation, have you came across a hybrid model then? Thin and thick registry model, and why is it not common?
So there, I mean, many gTLDs are both thin and thick in the sense that if you define thin to be registrar holds the data, and if you define thick to be registry holds the data, then for many gTLDs it's the case that both registry and registrar maintain the data. But it's about deciding whose copy is the authoritative copy, and ultimately, my view it should always be that the authoritative copy is the copy that's closest to the person who's actually providing the data. I think that's good data protection principle anyway. It's the privacy by design principle. And so it's the registrar data ultimately that's the most authoritative, and because they're the people who have the direct relationship with the customer. They're the ones who ask the customer, "What's your contact information for this domain name?" The question then is, well, what would a hybrid model look like? I guess you could talk about a third party, so that if neither the registrar nor the registry has the contact information, but someone else does. What that additional thing, that third thing, would look like, I don't really know. I could imagine there might be some potential benefits of having a third party hold that information for you. But what you're really talking about there is you're having a registry for your domain names and a registry for your contact information that are loosely coupled. Which, again, as I said before, I wanted to try and provoke some debate and discussion and some blue sky thinking. I mean, that's an interesting one, and probably bears further thought.
Cool. All right, audience, do you have any questions before I ask my own last question, Gavin? Well, to get the audience to think about Gavin, my last question is that between whoami proposal and inline context proposal, which one do you foresee is more favorable by the community?
I think the inline contacts is probably a bit more palatable. It certainly requires probably less effort on the part of the registry, because with the whoami model, you have to scan every single domain name for contact information in order to be able to process it, in order to determine eligibility or to contact the customer if there's a problem. And obviously, if there is a problem with the domain name, then you may not be able to retrieve that information because it uses the DNS, so it's an in-band process. So I think the inline contacts, it was an iteration of my thinking. So I started out with a kind of the radical libertarian model of don't collect anything and let self-publication happen. And as I thought more about it, I started to think a bit more actually about the need for a kind of a slightly different model where the information is supplied to the registry by the registrar, but isn't stored by the registry. So my feeling is that, so there's a progression of thinking. I think that inline contacts is probably a better option than whoami. But I have had people come to me at the time and then subsequent to the presentation, where people come to me from various technical organizations, a variety of industries, saying this actually solves a big problem for us, and you should develop this and push it through. I haven't done it, but it's I think there's some value in this existing. It's not necessarily an either or; it could be a both. So in the same way that domain operators and website operators voluntarily publish information like security.txt for reporting security issues and so on, there may actually be some valid use cases and benefits for encouraging website and domain operators to publish richer contact information in the DNS or on their website in a way that's machine readable for people who are interested in consuming that data. So one of the things I thought about would be, well, you could have a browser extension that could actually do that whoami lookup and present that contact information as part of the Chrome of the browser. Obviously, you can't necessarily trust it, but at least it's there, and it's presented in a way that could be, makes it easier for a customer of a website to find, who to call when they ordered apples and they got pears.
Excellent. I think due to time constraint, thank you so much again, Gavin, and we're looking forward to your new thoughts, new ideas in the more to come. All right. So, Amil, I will pass the floor to you. Thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you, Steph and Gavin, for the discussion. And before we go, can you fill out the survey that will pop up in front of your screen? As for your further feedback, kindly fill out the form that has been provided on the chat box, and don't forget about the Amazon gift card worth USD 50 each that could be yours. For more details, you may visit apatdansforum.my. The next session will be Digital Brand and Future Digital Commerce, and we'll start at 16:15 p.m. in UTC +8, and we will see you there. Thank you, everyone.